in looking at Circle of Hands, as opposed to Gray Magic, it's the original form. In looking at Circle of Hands, I was very much saying, if we're going to have these confrontational things, and if I'm going to keep this kind of Magic the Gathering mechanic that I've got here with the splits of offense and defense and so forth, how are we going to handle the ordering? And one thing I noticed in the Riddle of Steel, which also has that confrontational die mechanic, that ordering in the Riddle of Steel is extremely loosey-goosey. It's really very much, you go going almost all the way back to Holmes in some ways, hypothetically speaking, in the sense that you look at what's going on and you say, well, that dude goes first, which and also remember, all the actual passages of arms are treated as clash only, so there's really not much there. I mean, you could say, we know this guy's running in, we know this guy's standing his ground, and there's things like, rolling to see whether you can handle the terrain that you're moving over and stuff like that. So still though, I mean, again, the idea is we are interested in initiative, and we're not very interested in order. We let the order take care of itself when the seizure of initiative is in place. So in Circle of Hands, it turns into being like that, following sort of the initial framework of an order. And so I kind of worked with the experience that I'd had with Sorcerer, and then looking at Circle of Hands, which has that kind of offense versus defense, and then your defense versus my offense kind of thing at the same time, that I had taken away from Sorcerer. And now looking at this and saying, all right, this seems to me to actually need some sort of framework to be working from. So that's what we ended up with for, I keep saying we, me and the people that I was playing with the whole time. I am not speaking in any authorial or editorial we, but rather in terms of the trying things at the table we, and a wide variety of people and places. Well, there you have it. That's why it is handled as a circle, because it seems to actually work. One other thing, another door that opens about this concerns Dungeons and Dragons 4th edition, which is very much we all roll our individual initiative, and that sets the order, and then that order is set turn by turn by turn by turn in the course of the combat. Now, again, most of these highly ordered systems, including those where the number is fixed from the start and there are no dice for it, are more dynamic than they look if you look at the options. And 4th edition D&D is strikingly flexible in this regard in terms of dropping your place in that order, often in terms of timing something with someone else. They also have these helping rules where your role, your action, literally sets up a bonus for someone else, and that's your action. I have noted, and there are lots of others too, by the way, lots of other little tips, tricks, and so forth for changing up the order and operating off the advantages of your place in the order at this particular time. To say nothing of all of the many, many, many options in the game whereby you actually give actions to other people as part of what you're doing on your turn. Well, what was I about to say? What I was about to say is that in my experience, this is something that is very difficult to get across to people at the table. That you sit down and you say, we're going to be playing, Dungeons and Dragons, and for whatever reason, it is baked in. You roll initiative, and then it is freaking fixed all the way down. Case closed. That's done. That's the way we do it in this combat, and we are finished with all ordering. That's the initiative that you have, is where you landed in the order, and we're done. And nobody uses the helping rules, and nobody switches up to optimize the way that they're using this power relative to someone else's, and it's kind of disappointing. I try my best as a player in that particular game. But unless you get people actually working together and responding off one another and having characters agree or disagree, about that, then a great deal of the role playing, if you will, to coin a word, is lost. Not because people are being trapped by the system, the stereotype, well, we couldn't role play, we were playing the system. No, it's exactly the other way around. Because the system isn't getting handled by us, then the role playing kind of disappears. So that's what I have to say in regard to a very simple appearing question, which I greatly appreciate being asked. Next question is from Aldo. And this was more of a discussion. I'm actually appropriating a discussion that ended up being made of two questions. So just said, these are solid questions. I'm going to, we're going to loot this for the question and answer. So the first one is super easy to answer out of the gate. You can see this coming, right? Any thoughts on Shadow of the Demon Lord? Specifically the sequel game, Shadow of the Weird Wizard. No. Because I don't know it. I don't know a thing. So my thoughts on it are solely who's playing it and can I make it for that. That's all. So why did I say this was a big, important question full of stuff? Okay, because it is. Aldo talks about a lot of things to like in his reading of Shadow of the Weird Wizard. He talks about the sense that you have these randomized and decision points of character creation that just pop. And I love that. And he does too. And so there's this wonderful sense of, this fellow that I'm about to play has things to do, places to go. And I would not have come up with, this character either on my own, nor would it have been particularly fun just to pick from column A and column B. There's more here than that. So there's a fair amount of other things that he talks about that play is quite headlong into situations and other things that seem appropriate. So here's what we got to. I was grooving on things pretty well until the section on game mastering, where he starts talking about how the sage is in control of the story, how it's the sage's job to reposition plot elements so that players encounter them when missed, how the sage should fudge dice rolls to avoid too much character death, etc. Suddenly my jam was interrupted by the proverbial needle dragging across the record, and not in a good way. Here it comes. I'm hoping that Schwab's approach to game mastering isn't so intrinsic to the system that it can't be easily avoided. There's some negatives in there. Let me flip that. I'm hoping that Schwab's approach to game mastering isn't intrinsic to the system so that I can avoid that. So I'm hoping that the system doesn't have that built into it. And I'm wondering, back to the quoting, if you have any insight on that. Well, I hope I have insight on that because I talked a lot. So let's see. I might not. You choose. First, some months ago, in a conversation at the Patreon at a higher tier, there was a post in which there was a lot of discussion of these things. And one image that I talked about was Lucy and Charlie Brown and the football. But Jesse named a game called Black Void, in which this, and he described it in terms that are slightly differently phrased, but pretty much almost exactly what Aldo just wrote. Um, and he went into some detail, about precisely where this disconnect appears, and asked me, about other texts. And the texts are legion. I mean, there are so many texts like this, which ties into something that we've talked about in these questions and answers before. I went through the game mastering section for the Avalon Hill Rune Quest, which is, I think, arguably a seminal text for many. And someone else commented that it wasn't, I think it's JC, commented that it didn't quite come out and spit out those things that Aldo just talked about. But you can see it down the road, that if you do what that says, then those seem to be, tools that in the deeper part of the toolkit, right? I mean, that if you're going to be doing what they said, that sooner or later you're going to have to take off that lid shelf thing that they've got in there and go for the the bigger things down below. And I think that basically starts becoming incredibly embedded into gaming texts right about the time of the game mastering section of Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. That's, I think, really, second edition, 1989. That's kind of where it's baked in. And when the White Wolf games started talking about their golden rule, and which is pretty much, do all those things, then that's when, so I think it became given, if you're writing a role-playing game, this is what you say. Somebody needs to check out the early Shadowrun and tell me what it says there. I've got a version. Somebody make a diagram of all the Shadowrun editions someday, please. I've got some Shadowrun, but I'm not sure where it sits in this. I think it's second or something. But maybe somebody can check out the first and second editions of Shadowrun, because that text is hugely important in this period. So that's kind of when that idea is the idea of just, Game Master is super prep master and super ready for anything master and super player, uber player, story dude, campaign dude, visionary, that whole stuff from the Avalon Hill section, moving into master manipulator, textually speaking, obviously behaviorally preceding that, but textually speaking, basically they start saying it openly right around 1990. Okay, with all that said, it is no surprise that tons of games, and due to various industry things, game production and writing became extraordinarily imitative, even far more than it was before in the 80s. Extraordinarily imitative, so that the majority of games published during the 90s, as far as I'm concerned, are really not much more than, somebody trying to IP, a little version of Advanced Dungeons and Dragons second edition, a little version of Vampire the Masquerade, a little version of Shadowrun. In fact, other games that started differently swerved that way, so that, for example, the early Cyberpunk, which has pretty much nothing in common with the early Shadowrun, swerves hard to basically become, Shadowrun by another name without elf ears. So I am thinking that when we look across most of our experience, especially if many of you, kind of bathed yourself in the 90s role-playing scene, it's more often than not that you're going to be running into this phenomenon where you basically get excited by the introductory section, and then you get excited by the character creation, and at least find some of the options playable. They're often told in very, hyperventilated, excited language. and perhaps get excited by some of the imagery and other stuff about the whole thing. And then if you are actually reading the text and then you hit that game mastering section and then you are like, you got to be kidding me. How can I play that awesome thing? Or what about our situation that was all up for grabs and who knows what's going to happen? And this sense that, and you, my friend, are there, you're in the thick of it. How is all of that going to actually occur as a phenomenon in play when some dude is there taking care of everything? Taking care of, meaning one could say, whoa, that means nurturing it. That means, giving a bath and giving its regular feedings and taking care of it. No, it really means taking play out in the backyard and, taking care of it.